family from the UK say they were forced off a plane to Turkey after they asked fellow passengers around them not to eat nuts because of their daughter's severe allergy.
Well, the airline has defended the decision by the captain, saying it couldn't guarantee a nut-free environment, as our reporter Joe Campbell explains.
This was the holiday Georgie Palmer and daughter Rosie had been looking forward to, but it couldn't have got off to a worse start. Arriving for the flight from Gatwick as they boarded the plane, they asked if cabin crew could request other passengers refrain from eating peanuts because of Rosie's nut allergy. The crew's answer a flat no, so they talked to one of the ground handling team.
She said, look, why don't you just tell the passengers yourself? I stood at the front of the plane for the rows that could hear me. I simply said, please, could you not eat nuts on the plane because of our daughter's severe allergy? You know, airborne nut particles have the capacity to provoke a very bad reaction. And then without asking, one by one, row by row by row, people turned to the row behind them, until it reached the back of the plane.
The captain of the Sun Express flight reacted altogether differently when he heard what had happened.
The pilot from the cockpit started shouting at me. I assume he was shouting at me in Turkish, and told us we had to get off the plane, and that was that. Back in the terminal, Rosie's dad had to console her.
When we got the news that we had been booted off the plane, then it just really hit hard. It felt very embarrassing.
The parents of Natasha Ednan Laperouse began campaigning after the 15-year-old died when she ate a sandwich containing sesame on a flight in 2016. They say some airlines have made strides in addressing the problem, but describe the response in this case as appalling.
Some airlines are actually really, really good. And in fact, some airlines also have a no-nut policy. They have no nuts served of any sort on board in any of their food. And that is, you know, a clear statement that they obviously take, for example, nut allergies very seriously. And they show that by their actions and their policies. Other airlines, I think this case is possibly one of the worst we've ever heard of, actually mistreating customers.
A spokesman for Sun Express said we refrain from making these kinds of announcements as, like many other airlines, we cannot guarantee an allergen-free environment on our flights, nor prevent other passengers from bringing food items containing allergens on board. They say the captain of the flight decided it would be safest if the passengers group did not travel. The family finally made it to Turkey on another airline, but have found themselves considerably out of pocket.
What a horrible experience for the family. Joe Campbell reporting there. We're joined by travel journalist Simon Calder. Morning, Simon. On the runway at Gatwick. Careful there. We heard from the airline in question there, my plane, my rules. Can they just kick a family off like that?
Well, this was a very complex case. Now, I understand Georgie Palmer and her family did exactly the right thing, which is that if you have a severe allergic reaction to nuts, for example, you should tell the airline well in advance. You should then, as soon as you arrive at the airport, and this was a flight from Gatwick to Dalaman in Turkey, tell the ground staff, I understand that, and then when you're boarding the plane, you tell the cabin crew. However, there is no guarantee that they will make an announcement. Even the Global Airlines Organization, IATA, says, well, you can ask, but there's no guarantee they're going to make it. I should be absolutely clear that the airlines that most of us are going to be flying off to the Mediterranean on, so that's EasyJet, British Airways, Ryanair, Jet2, they will all say, OK, we'll make an announcement to other passengers and we won't serve any nuts on board. But of course, there's nothing to stop people bringing their own nuts on board. And that is extremely worrying. If you're at 30,000 feet and you have a severe allergic reaction, that can, as we sadly saw with the case of Natasha Ednan Laperouse, have fatal consequences.
I mean, if I had a child with a peanut allergy and I was watching this morning, it would really make me think that all of my options when it comes to holidays are restricted. What would families in that position be advised to do?
Well, it is very tricky. Certainly, you need to talk to your doctor, first of all, and make sure that she or he is happy with your decision to travel. But then study, and all of these are available online. the airline's policy on nut allergies, but bearing in mind that there's nothing you can do. If somebody decides halfway across the Atlantic they're going to open up a packet of peanuts near you, that there is no way to do that. For example, of course, even if you had a global ban on nuts, which a lot of people would say, that would really help to reduce harm. The security check is only to look for people with weapons. It's not to look for peanuts. So it's a really, really tricky one. And of course, anybody with a nut allergy should carry an adrenaline auto-injector, also known as EpiPens, and other brand names, just in case anything happens on board.
And lots of passengers this week as well, Simon, worrying about turbulence. The tragic news that the passenger died on the Singapore Airlines flight, and then over the weekend that flight from Doha to Dublin with quite extreme turbulence. Is this something we're going to have to get used to a bit more because of climate change, or is it just coincidence that we've had these two cases, one way more extreme than the other, I should say?
Yes, well, the Airlines International Organisation, IATA, says that cases of turbulence are increasing. Certainly, we are much more attuned to them. Sadly, Qatar Airways Flight 17 yesterday from Doha to Dublin, there was a dozen people injured on that. Now, it was not the same order of magnitude as the tragic flight involving Singapore Airlines. This happened actually in the first half of the flight while they were going over Turkey, and the flight continued to its destination, where 6 crew and 6 passengers were taken off for treatment of relatively minor injuries. I've, in the past 24 hours, conducted an online poll on social media saying, should actually seatbelt wearing at all stages of the flight, unless you're going to the washroom or whatever, be compulsory. Majority so far, with over 4,000 votes in, 6-1 in favour of yes, you should actually be made to wear your seatbelt. I hope every passenger is going to be strapped in pretty much at all times. Just imagine, you wouldn't be in a car without a seatbelt, and it's absolutely a very, very easy option to reduce the risk of harm. Aviation overall, incredibly safe. You're actually much more likely to be harmed in turbulence than you are involving anything on the flight itself.
Really interesting, Simon, and I think you're absolutely right. It's got us all thinking about keeping that seatbelt on throughout the flight. Simon Calder at Gatwick Airport for us this morning. Thank you.
Lots of comments coming in from you about that as well. Tony's just been in touch talking about whether you could have an air filter mask or something, whether that might help somebody who's got an allergy. Always keen to hear from you. It affects so many families, doesn't it?
It really does.